then I guess that will make us. Okay, greetings everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar that those of you who have been following redistricting in South Carolina will find very interesting. My name is Fleming Bruce. I'm speaking to you from Columbia. I'm a member of the steering committee of the South Carolina Coalition for Black Communities. I'm also a preservationist and a community organizer as well. And I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to bring individuals who are also working in the vineyards of redistricting here in South Carolina and have something very exciting to share with all of you. So today our guests are going to be from the Crowd Academy. And our first guest will talk to us a little bit about what that is. Our next guest will be Charles Mann. He will take us through a organizing procedure for each county, one that each county can use to organize for the next phase of redistricting that's coming our way. And the third person who is with the Crowd Academy with us today is Lindy Stubbs. So we're going to start with Bridget Deline, if she could, if you can introduce yourself, my dear, and give them a little bit about what the Crowd Academy is all about.
Well, thank you very much, Fleming Bruce, for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this extremely important webinar. Again, my name is Bridget Deline. And I would also like to, give appreciation to Charles Mann and Lindy Stubbs for your superb work in our communities. Redistricting of the people, by the people, for the people, that's who we are. Crowd Fellows of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice and SC Counts. We are here for you. We support communities of interest and our partner organizations in their organizing efforts to monitor and intervene in the redistricting cycle. Our main focus is to educate communities on the redistricting process and intervention points. We monitor the redistricting process as it pertains to the community. We draw and propose alternative maps using map drawing software. We tell our stories and encourage others to tell their stories about why redistricting is important. Through these stories, we help others understand how important the process will be in our local, state, and federal government and the voting processes. We have the tools needed to encourage a transparent and fair redistricting process because this process is vital for protecting local democracy and setting precedents for inclusive redistricting cycles. One of the most important aspects of what we do is advocacy for the people. We feel if we are not meeting the needs of the people, we are not doing our job. With that said, let's move forward with allowing our illustrious community leader and advocate, Charles Mann, to do his job and do his presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And thank those of you who've joined us and my colleague, Lindy Stubbs. And the one thing, and Ms. Bruce, thank you for putting this together so that we can put forth some of the ideas that we have all been working on for the last several months. One thing about myself, I call myself a joiner, and I'm a joiner because I want to make changes in my community. And I mentioned that because in addition to being a South Carolina Fellow for Redistricting under the umbrella of SC Counts and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, I also have my own nonprofit, which is a voter education, voter turnout, and voter registration organization based in Spartanburg. I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters. And I mentioned that because as a result of that, I sat on the statewide Redistricting Advisory Committee for the League of Women Voters. And as Ms. Catherine mentioned earlier, I'm also a member of the South Carolina Coalition of Black Communities. Now, I mentioned the League of Women Voters and the statewide redistricting committee. And after sitting on that with several people around the state, I began to wonder, well, what are we going to do locally? We're talking a lot about the state House, the state Senate, and the congressional, but what about the local aspect? And then I talked with my colleagues and some of the people in the state, and I came up with this idea about setting up local redistricting advisory committees. And with that, I'm going to share my screen now. And I'm going to share my screen. And let me put it in full mode. There we go. And we're all working under, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. And this is about setting up local redistricting advisory committees. So before we get into that, I do want to jump into what we see as the timeline with all of this. Most of you already know that the South Carolina House and the South Carolina Senate have passed their redistricting maps, and they're now sitting on the desk of the governor. Sometime this week or next week, both of those houses will also pass their congressional maps and send those to the governor for passing. So now we're talking about what happens locally. So here we are in December, and we're suggesting that now you begin to think and create your local redistricting boards, committees this December. We also suggested during this month, if you agree with what we talk about here tonight, you address your local councils and your school boards. And then in January, begin to have regular meetings with your redistricting committees and talk about the things that you want to talk about, as you see we will develop later on. Part of that in January, create your community-based criteria. And then through January through March, draw your new lines and present them to your councils. Now, the thing about all of this is that starting in January and working through to about March or as late as June, your local committees, your local councils, city council, county councils, and school boards will draw their lines and approve them. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So if you look at all of this, you have either in some communities, you'll have deadlines of March, because March is a deadline, because at that time, the filings open up for people to register for the partisan races, and those partisan races will have primaries in June. So look at the March 15th date, that date there for that. What is this all about? This is about the constitutional demand for equal population and the one person, one vote concept. And when we say the districts must be divided into ideal populations, as an illustration, take a look at, say you had a population of 100,000 and you had 5 districts. So you divide those 5 districts into the 100,000, and therefore you have an ideal population of about 20,000. Now that's an illustration. The way this happens in communities is that due to the census, the 2020 census, they're taking the total county population, the total city population, or the populations in the school boards or special districts, and they're dividing them by the current number of districts they have. And that is what will happen on the local level. And then you have to deal with what is called the ideal deviation. Now, the deviation in the state and local, and now we're talking really the local, the deviation will be anywhere up to 10%. Now, what does that mean? That means from the ideal population, and say that ideal population is 20,000 in this case, you can go up or down no more than 10% from the lowest to the highest in creating your districts. and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what is covered under this local redistricting concept? In your communities, as in mine, your county councils, your city councils, your school boards, and special districts. And that happens a little bit in the state of South Carolina, but mostly we're talking about the top 3. Based on the 2020 census data, all those districts and all those city council, county council, and school board districts now have to recalibrate based on that new data from the 2020 census. Now, I had someone ask me a question the other night when talking about this, and they said, can they consider any other data? And the theoretical and appropriate answer is no. They can only consider the data that was collected during the 2020 census. So
now, sorry, Charles. Do you want me to give you the questions as they come up? Because we do have a question that has come up.
Go
Or do you
ahead.
want to wait?
Let's go ahead and try it as we go along.
Okay, so this question is, our county is just having one public meeting on January 27th, and then they plan to finalize it with a final reading early February. Is this live? Is this normal?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, the answer is yes. And this goes to the guidance that most of the counties are getting from the State Department of South Carolina, and that department is the Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. That is normal. What we are saying, and as you will see that we're going to talk about here, you need to go to your local body, that governing body, and say one is not enough. Okay, one public hearing is not enough. One public hearing complies with the guidelines that they are being given. This county and the local municipalities, the local governing bodies can set up more if they choose, but they're only going to do that. They're only going to do that if you request it and demand it. So it is normal, but you should request more. And we're going to talk about why. So I'm going to go ahead and move along here. So why have the local oversight? The effort here is to create a more collective community voice. It is to have an ability to have more impact. It is to have the power of public pressure. It is to have the volume of the public microphone. And we're saying all this because in some of the communities around the state, and mine included, and I'm in the upstate in Spartanburg, we find that when we go as individuals, that those who are in public office will say, hey, Charles said something the other day, Bridget, do you agree with that? And that is an effort, I believe, and a lot of other people believe, it is an effort to divide and conquer. Now, the only way to combat that, and I shouldn't say the only way, but one major way of combating that is to create a more collective community voice. Otherwise, your voices will be sliced and diced, or they will say, I hear so many voices, we don't know what to do, so we're going to do what we started to do in the first place. So the whole goal here is to create a more collective community voice. So what does a committee like this look like? It is citizens from the city, county, and associated municipalities within the county. I'm suggesting that it has at least 12 members, active members. I'm also suggesting that you divide it, the larger committee, into focus committees, one on the city, one on the county, and one on the school board. And the basic work of the committee is done in these focus committees, and then you report up to try and influence and report out to a larger group. Now, why am I suggesting this? I have found in my community organization that if in a larger group that you try to deal with these three topics, it would be very difficult. If you break it up into smaller groups and work it out and report up to the larger group, you can get more done. And considering the timeline that we have, in some cases, as I mentioned, the deadlines in some communities are going to be March 15th, because that's the filing date for partisan elections. If you look at the timeline, you don't have a lot of time. So if you break up into the smaller focus groups, focus committees, and report up, you can get more done and you can get it done quicker. I'm also suggesting that this be a nonpartisan composition. If you go in with all Democrats or all Republicans or all whatever, then you're going to be labeled as a partisan group. It will take away part of your ability to communicate to the governing bodies. I'm also suggesting that you go and bring in all the civic groups that you can, anywhere from groups from the League of Women Voters, neighborhood associations, other civic groups that have an interest in this, the NAACP, certain church groups have committees within their churches that deal with things like racial equity. Bring them in. I'm also suggesting that you have it at least 50% minority, because what we're trying to protect here, in its essence, is minority representation on these governing bodies. And this last bullet here can be a little bit controversial, but I'm also suggesting don't bring in politicians at the beginning. Now, why do I say that? I have found out in my community, and it's probably true in yours, that when you bring in the politicians, the local council people, county council people, your school board people, some of our people are hesitant to speak in front of them and to say certain things in front of them. So I'm suggesting that you say to your local office holders, your local servants, you say to them, hold off for a second until we get organized, until we know what we want to say to you, and then bring them in. And the other thing is, when you bring them in at the beginning, there's a tendency for our local politicians, our local office holders, as we like to call them, our local leaders, there's a tendency for them to take over. And you don't really want that, because once that happens, I believe, and from my experience, you lose that community-based building that you need to have when you approach them. So hold off on the politicians initially. When to create? I think now is the time to start having those conversations. In Spartanburg, for instance, we just had our third meeting last night. And we started meeting about 4 weeks ago. And it was to talk to people, do you really think this is a good idea? Do you really think we can have some impact? And we did it all without political people involved. And with those groups that I mentioned earlier, we brought them in. So now is the time to start creating and thinking about it and having those discussions. Compose your group by January. Set up your subcommittee, focus committees in January. And by the way, folks, I always say this, do not ask permission from others to do this. Just do it. Because when you ask for permission, if you go to your city council, for instance, and say, we want to set up a local committee to provide oversight of what you're going to do, your local city council is going to say, there is no authority for you to do that. And we don't have the authority to join you in that. And so in essence, they're saying to you, you can't do it, okay, because you have no authority. So then they're telling you not to do it. So don't ask for permission in your communities. Get your community people together and just do it and provide the oversight. And by the way, when we did that here in Spartanburg, we went last evening also to our council meeting, and we announced to them that we had set up this committee. And when we said that we had set up this committee, you could hear the scuttlebutt of the council people saying, who are these people? What are they doing? They didn't know about us, but now they do. And now they know they have community oversight on redistricting. So what does the committee do? You set up your community redistricting criteria. And what do I mean by that? In some communities, you will say that we want to keep our Black seats that we have on our county council, our city council, and our school board. To me, and to the people that I'm working with, that's one of your criteria. We don't want to lose what we have. So, and then you can talk about your communities of interest, and I'm going to tell you more about that later on. Now, remember, there are no guidelines or regulations. South Carolina is the only state in the union that does not have a constitutional provision or state regulation regarding redistricting. So you may ask, well, what is it that the state legislature just did? Since there's no state law, no state constitutional provision, what is it that they just did? They did what they do every 10 years. They assign a committee out of the state legislature. That committee creates guidelines and they follow them. And those guidelines become what they govern themselves by. And they can change it anytime during the course of the meeting or during the course of redistricting. So keep that in mind. There are no guidelines, so you can make up your own. And I also say to people, determine what factors are key for your community. I'm hearing a lot when I have these discussions about gentrification. What part does it play? It does play a part, and I'm going to talk about that. So determine what's key for your community. Set a timeline and a process for you to have your public input that would then be input into the governing body of the city or county council. Now, the person who asked about that one public hearing that they're going to have, that means that if they have no other public hearings, you need to be ready to have your public input at that public hearing. Because if they don't change it, if you don't request more and demand more, they are going to only have that one public hearing. It is up to you in your community to say one is not enough and tell them that they need to put in more. And they're going to say, well, when? Well, then you tell them when. And when you get those kind of things done, do engage your local office holders because they need to be in the process, but bring them in when you are ready to talk about what you want in your communities. And then provide input to new district lines. What is your focus? In this Local Redistricting Advisory Committee, and the acronym for that is LRAC, we want you to focus primarily on your communities of interest. And I'll tell you what that means. We want you to talk about competitiveness and fairness in setting up the districts. We want you to talk about keeping your communities intact. For instance, in Spartanburg, there is a community which is known as Park Hills, and it's a community like any other community. But what happened in the last redistricting is they put half of that community in one city council district, and they put the other half in another district. And so that community is divided when it comes to electing representation on city council. So we're saying stress to them and that you want your communities to remain intact and not be divided. We also want you to focus on the voting age populations. And I'll show you in a bit how to look at that based on the data that was collected during the 2020 census. We also want you to focus on avoiding cracking and packing. It's a term that most of you have heard. If you don't know what that is, reach out to Bridget and to Lindy or to myself, and we can tell you more about what that looks like. And we want you to focus less on incumbency protection. Now, people say, well, what does that mean? Well, it means something as simple as what the State Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs is doing. When I attended their meeting via online, via streaming, the director of that department said, we're going to help you draw your lines. But first, we need to know the home addresses of all the council people. Now, that's a very slick way, an easy way of protecting the incumbents that are in office. And they are basically going to draw the districts or calibrate the districts, keeping in mind where the current council person lives. We think that should be of less importance than keeping your communities of interest and keeping your communities intact. But it is pervasive throughout South Carolina that they are protecting incumbent office holders.
Charles, I have a question and a observation. So I'll give you the observation first. One of the attendees here is basically saying, whoa, this just looks like a lot. And I'm not sure if I can handle doing all of this. And so we want to give them reassurances that we are here to help them along the way. And then I have the second question. Now, I don't know, do you want to respond to that or?
Let me respond to that.
Okay.
Let me respond to that. I am not going to sugarcoat it at all. This is not easy work. Okay, it is not easy work. And I think in a certain way, it is made complicated so it is seemingly difficult and not easy. And when things are difficult and not easy, people tend not to care, not to pay attention. Well, guess what people who are drawing district lines want you to do? They don't want you to care. They don't want you to pay attention. So it is difficult work. One of the things I've been doing full-time community organizing for about the last 3 years since I retired. And I got involved because I saw things in my community that I wanted changed. This is hard work. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. Doing this kind of work is not easy. But guess what? There are people there to help you. There are people like me who works in the upstate of South Carolina. There are people like Bridget who works in the middle part of South Carolina. There are people like Lindy who is on the call, who work in the lower part of the state, in the PD area, in the coastal area. We know this is not easy work. I mean, if you're looking for something easy, this is not it, okay? I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. It takes time. It takes good community organizing. But guess what? If you do this work, and we have to do this work, you have an impact on your community. Maybe your community is not divided. Maybe you create and have influence with your political office holders, whereby you have more competitive districts. Maybe you get another person of color elected because you had impact. So no, it is not easy work, but you're not by yourself.
Mm-hmm. And Bridget did let him know that he is in her district or area of assistance, so she's going to be able to help. And Lindsay adds, one way to make an impact is just to let your local representatives know that you're watching and paying attention at those meetings.
Yeah.
Now, the second question is, without the input of LRAC, how does the local county and cities get a map created? In other words, who is actually doing the work and what is their work? What input are they using in their work if they don't get it from the public in the form of a LRAC?
The first thing, let me back into that question, into the answer. Most of the people on your county councils, city councils, and school boards, a large number of them have never been through this process. The last time we did this was 10 years ago. So if you've got somebody who's been on council 4 or 5 years, they've never done this. So they're reaching out to their city administrations, and they're reaching out to the state, but hopefully they're reaching out to citizens. They're reaching out to the League of Women Voters. They're reaching out to the NAACP to say, hey, how do we do this? So if they don't do that and they don't get that input, here's where they're getting their support from. They're getting it primarily right now from the South Carolina Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. That department is headed by a gentleman by the name of Frank Rainwater. That department, it is my understanding, has contracted directly with 30 counties out of the 46 in South Carolina to be their consultant, to give them guidance, to help them with map drawing. But what is also happening, that department is also advising all 46 counties, directly or indirectly. Now, I have issues with that. As a community organizer, I have issues with that because I look at that department and I'm going to show you let me show you what their advice looks like. I'm going to stop a share here and I'm going to share with you another document. This is a report to the city of Spartanburg from the South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Department. This department has prepared benchmark reports for all the 46 counties in the state of South Carolina and selected municipalities. This is the guidance that they're giving. They're telling them that this is based off of the 2020 census.
Oh, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Can everyone see the screen? I can see the screen. Lindy, can you not see it? Okay, Miko can see it.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
This is an official report from that state department, and they issue it to all the counties and municipalities that request it. So, and they talk about, the 14th Amendment, the Voting Rights Act, racial minorities. But here's where it gets into the nitty-gritty. They provide the data. Data is essential in this effort. They tell them, and this is to the city of Spartanburg. So they said to the city of Spartanburg, you have 6 districts. This is how the populations in those districts now exist. Here's your goal of 64.5, because what they've done is taken the 6 districts and divided into the city population of Spartanburg, which is 38,738, and that number comes out to be 64.55. And then they tell them how much they're over in those districts, over or under, and then the deviation. And they provide the graph. They show them how the districts currently are composed. They then tell them how that data looks based on, the 20 by race and by population from the 2020 census, where the Black populations are, what the white populations are, and they provide all this data. And they provide guidance. And in some cases, upon request from that jurisdiction, they will also draw the maps. Now, the one thing that they're also saying here is the deviation. They're saying select a deviation range of 5%. That is a recommendation, not a requirement. The deviation can go up to 10%. If it's 5%, some people are interpreting that to mean you can have a minus deviation of 2.5 and a plus deviation of 2.5, hence 5%. Now, the real interpretation of that, and that interpretation comes from a lot of oversight groups, meaning that 5% is it should be a low, from the low point to the high point of 5%. So that means you can have your lowest county having a minus deviation of 1% and a plus deviation of 4% for a total of 5%. So the NAACP, through the Legal Defense Fund, is challenging this recommendation. And they are saying counties can go up and municipalities can go up to 10%. But the state is recommending 5%. Now, why are they recommending 5%? That is the same recommendation that the State House of Representatives is using, 5%. Now, the State House of Representatives in South Carolina, using their criteria, which the State Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs is recommending to counties and cities, that criteria has produced in the hands of a Republican legislature the most egregious and most gerrymandered maps in the country right now. Okay, they're on the lines of what's being challenged in Texas. So that is why I'm saying create criteria from your community and present that and demand that the city or county or school board adopt your current criteria. Now, here's the booger with that. They're under no obligation to accept your information, to accept your criteria, to accept your maps. They're under no obligation to do so. But here's also part of that. If you don't present what your community wants, your legislative body, your city council, your county council, your school board will say, well, no one ever told us they had another idea. So we did it our way. So you have to have your voice, but realize that they're under no obligation. But at the same time, if they hear your voice, you can move them from where they are to closer or maybe to exactly where you want them to be. Here's some other data that they present. And they present this to municipalities, these thematic maps, white population, where they are, the percentages. They also do the same thing with the Black population and where they are. So if you don't present your ideas, this is what they are going to base their maps on. Okay? Now, the other reason that I wanted to show this to you is that when you look at the raw data, and the data that I'm considering raw is this data, how much did your community change? Where are the population areas within your city and your county? The one thing that you have to do is work from the same set of data. If you go in with a different set of data, they're going to say to you, you have the wrong data. So work with their data, but realize you can use their data to create maps and to create districts that are also more favorable to your community. But make sure you're working from the same set of data. I hope that's a long way of answering that question. And I know that person who said, my gosh, this is a lot of work. Yes, it is. And we have to get past that point of a lot of work because it is. So I'm going to pick up again where I was, if I may.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the goals is to keep districts where you have choice. One of the things that we saw in the state effort is, and particularly when the South Carolina House drew maps, what they did is drew maps where people in those districts had less choice. Meaning, if there's a Democratic member or a person of color in that district, they drew districts whereby that Democratic representative or that person of color may not be able to win anymore. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we use the term that legislators should not draw districts that choose their voters, that they should draw districts where voters choose their representatives. And that should be one of your rallying cries as well. And in areas where populations, where you can't create districts of choice, so to speak, look for opportunities to create opportunity districts, meaning that you may not be able to help them draw districts where you can have a person of your choice, but you can bring the numbers closer to maybe not this cycle, but next cycle, you may be able to have a person of your choice. And resist all efforts to gerrymander, pack, and crack your districts. Have a goal to keep your communities whole, like a Park Hills community where it was divided, where it is whole. And I will say this, and I hesitated about adding this last bullet, but it keeps coming up in conversations. When you look at your districts, think about what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Now, and that brings us to a bit about gentrification.
Mhm.
And I have this little phrase that I use. Gentrification means housing. Housing means residents. Residents means voters. So when you look in your community and you see a new housing development going up, that's housing going up. But the people who go in that housing are voters. And what's happening a lot in our communities in the state and around the country is developers are looking for new land.
Mhm.
In a lot of our communities where housing is high and where they've built a lot, they're running out of land. So they're looking in underserved communities. And why are they looking in underserved and minority communities? They're looking in those communities because land is cheap, okay? Land on the south side of town is not the same price as it is on the east side of town. It is cheaper. And another reason that they look in these communities is that resistance to development is little. There is very little resistance. And why is there so little resistance in these communities? There is little resistance because our politicians, our leaders, our city fathers are looking for development to bring into those communities. So they're saying, come in, please build in our communities. And that happened in Spartanburg. And we had a developer come in and everybody was saying, well, we need development in our communities. But guess what they're doing? When they bring this development into our community and housing development in our communities, most of that housing, if there is not a requirement for affordable housing, all of that development is going to be market rate.
Mhm.
Now, in most of our communities, in some of those communities, and I'll pick the south side of Spartanburg, the average income is $24,000. When you bring in market rate housing through gentrification into our communities, the rents that are going to be for leasing in those communities is going to be market rate, which means somewhere between $1,500 to $3,000 a month. You cannot afford, the people in those communities cannot afford that kind of market rate leasing. So guess what? The people who come in those communities are people that don't look like me. It may not look like most of you on the call. So now you have new people coming into your communities, and guess what? They may not necessarily vote like you and I who live in those communities. So over time, over the next 10 years, as you see housing being developed into those minority communities, those Black communities, those underserved communities, new people are coming in who don't necessarily vote like the native inhabitants of those communities. So you need to pay attention to that. You need to participate in your planning boards. Make sure you have people on your planning commissions who look at this stuff and can come back and say to you, by the way, a developer is coming to us and he's looking to build a development in your community in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years. So you need to know that ahead of time, because guys, by the time it gets to city council and they're taking a vote on it, it's a done deal.
Mhm.
All that's over is the shouting. So
Yeah.
there's a phrase that says, instead of pulling people, out of the river all the time, we need to go upstream and see why people are continuing to be either thrown in the river or jumping into the river. This is a way of going upstream and finding out about development that is coming 2 to 3 to 5 years in our communities. Hence the word concept, gentrification.
Mhm. And I'll also add to the definition of gentrification, the idea that we also have our communities that don't get the same level of service, don't have the same quality of life, don't get the same protections that other communities get. When you're bringing these new developments into our communities, there's not the same kind of care about impacts. And so what ends up happening is gentrification in the push out direction. So you have a couple of different ways you could push people out, and that is one of them. Increasing taxes is another.
And by the way, folks, we all want development in our communities. We all do. But I'm saying to people, don't just let developers come in with the tax incentives given to them by county and city governments and just do anything in your community.
Mhm.
I had a conversation with a guy about a year ago, and he said, Charles, you can't tell that developer what to do with his money. I said, you're right, I can't. But I can tell him what to do in my community.
Mhm.
This is my community, and I have a right to say what I think should be done here. And I think when more of us have that attitude, you will see that things will be shaped a little differently when development comes into your community. I'm going to move on.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about communities of interest, because this is what I think it really focuses in on a lot when we talk about local redistricting. Communities of interest are ethnic, racial, and economic groups. For instance, if you have a big Hispanic area, you want to make sure that that community remains intact because they are a community of interest. You want to make sure that your voting precincts are intact. In some cases, in order to get to the numbers they want, they will split a voting precinct down the middle. And one group of people in the same community will vote in one precinct and another group will vote in another. Make sure that they remain intact. Communities of interest share places of worship and religion. If you have a large Jewish community that live in, and I'll use a different one. In Spartanburg, we have East Indians, not Native Americans, but East Indians, Asian Indians, that have moved into a portion of Spartanburg County. And they have hence become a community of interest. Well, it would be wrong for a line to be drawn right through the middle of that community, because then their influence is diluted. Okay, so look at religion and worship as well. Our historic influence is a community of interest. A lot of our communities, and a lot of them are on the south side of cities, have a rich history. When you look into communities that had the Black Wall Streets, and all of our communities had that, there's a historic influence, a historic reference that we want to keep. That is a community of interest. Government services areas are communities of interest. In some larger cities, you have government putting service centers in districts. Make sure that they stay within a geographical area and geographical locations and features. Schools are, in a lot of our communities, we have elementary schools and middle schools. those schools should be and considered an area of a community of interest. And sometimes transportation is. When you have people who need buses to come through, public transportation to come through, that is a community of interest. So keep those things in mind when you think about that, when you are considering and talking about drawing districts.
Okay, we have another question, if I may. This question is, where are the planning meetings posted? So I think this will go back to either when will the city and counties and school boards post their public hearings, and what the community groups, the LRAC, is going to do, and how will those meetings be advertised?
The local redistricting advisory groups and your local governing bodies, city and county councils and school boards, let's look at those differently. Your LRACs, community centers, community houses, or you can do it on Zoom. Okay. Your local jurisdictions, county council, city councils, they are going to use public buildings. And in some communities, that means using city council, city council hall, city council room to have their public hearings. If you have recreation centers, some of your jurisdictions are saying that they're going to put maps out for you to take a look at in those locations. What we plan to do in Spartanburg, now that we have gotten organized, we're going to go to one of the recreation centers and have a larger community meeting. And that is where we're going to invite in all the local office holders to come and participate in that. It is more than likely that if a jurisdiction has said it is only going to have one public hearing, that is going to be at and during a city council session, or before or after a city council session. But it is up to you to ask that question. So they say they're going to have a public hearing. Where is it going to be? And not only where is it going to be, what time of day is it going to be? A lot of these people, sometimes you're going to find out that these public hearings are going to take place at 2 and 3 o'clock in the day. Okay. Now it's obvious that working people cannot take off from work to go to a public hearing. So we are saying, not only where do you have it, but the time that you have it. Have it in the evening or shortly after work, 6, 7 o'clock, where people can come in after their day jobs and just be plain citizens to participate. I hope
So
that
those
answers.
are the public, those are the public hearing dates. The LRACs will organize in their communities and decide their own dates.
Yes, and on meeting places. Like I said, in Spartanburg, we've been doing them by Zoom so far because people are still not comfortable because of COVID. I went up to Cherokee County recently, and we did a meeting at a church. Okay, and we're now going to expand that to include other people. But our initial meeting was in a church, hall, and we met for 3 hours because it's a lot. So when you talk about, I'm going to move on. When you talk about the districts, strive for districts that are competitive and fair. Once again, looking at what happened in the state, on the state level, unfair districts and no competition. I'll give you a little stat here that we don't want to happen on the local level. There's a stat that says since 2010, over 50% of all the state races went uncompetitive. And what do I mean by that? Only one candidate ran. And only one candidate ran because people who may want to run, looked at the composition of the district and say, there's no way I could win. It is not competitive, okay? And that's something we really, really need to start taking a look at as we look at districts. And that goes to districts being lopsided. If you want to take a look at that in your district, go to your local voting elections board website, look at recent elections for state house, county councils, city councils, and look at, and school boards, and look at how many people have opponents in those races. And then ask yourself, why? Now, the major concern, and I mentioned this earlier, is voter dilution. We don't want people to be sliced and diced in a way that if you have a Black community, that it's now in 3 districts in the city council, right? And they come right down and they split it up 3 ways. Well, instead of having 100 people that can vote and get a candidate of choice, you now have 33 people with other people who now can outvote you. So take a look at that when you take a look at that. And also consider what's happening with the Voting Rights Act. I won't get a lot into that right now unless you have some questions about it. Get the data. The whole basis of redistricting is based on data. Forget the emotional arguments. We want a Black representative. We want to make sure that we get somebody. It all goes down to the data. So where do you get the data? You get it from county or city GIS departments. And GIS stands for Geological Information Systems, or Geographic Information Systems. Most counties have them in the state of South Carolina. I would say one of my cohorts, Lindy, is working with me because I was having issues getting some of my data. She helped me get my data from my local departments, and they don't make it easy for you to get. And when you do get that data, make sure that it is interactive, meaning that you can take the maps that you get and they can be imported into some software that I'm going to show you shortly. The data is also housed in the 2020 census data. You can do drill downs in that. And Lindy on the call is a former census worker, and she can help all of us with that. The data also comes from the South Carolina Department of Revenue Affairs, that presentation that I showed you earlier. And by the way, folks, if you can get it, get the 2010 redistricting data if it's available. Now, why do I say that? Because now you can have the comparison. What did the district look like when they drew it in 2010 or 2011? And what does it look like now? Where were the population shifts? Where do people now live in my community as opposed to 10 years ago? And take a look at that. So what does that data look like? My friend Lindy created this for me the other day. And when you look at this, you go, oh my God, look at all the numbers. That's the data, okay? And she looked at this for Spartanburg County for me. And here on the top is what we have 6 districts in the county. And this is what they looked like in 2010, okay? And here's the actual population in those districts. Well, let's go down to 2020 now, that data is now. This is what those districts now look like, okay? And you can see the deviation. You can see the red areas, okay? You can take a look at where is the Hispanic population in those districts and what they come up to and their percentages. And what a lot of us are looking at is what is the Black age voting population in our districts, okay? And what percentage do they comprise in the districts as they are currently driven? So I'm gonna pick on Spartanburg County right now. Look at District 1. and look at the Black age voting population and the percentage. Now look at how that looks in other districts. District 1 in Spartanburg has been packed with Black voters. Okay, now if you see this in your community, you have to ask yourself, and your community has to ask the question, do we still want to do this? Do we still want to do this? Now this guarantees that if all the Black voters, eligible voters in District 1 in Spartanburg go vote, we can always elect a Black person to represent us. Okay? But what it also says, when you look at the percentage and the distribution in the other counties, well, we'll never be able to elect a Black person in these other ones. Okay? So when you look at that in your community and working with people like Bridget and Lindy, can we draw a map that still can create a situation where we can elect a person of color, or in this case, our candidate of choice in that district? But can we bring those numbers down, say from 48 to 45 or 40? And can we distribute them, say for instance, in District 6, and bring those numbers up now? That now we can make that a more competitive district. And if we look at the housing trends, going back to gentrification and going back and looking at that, that maybe not this cycle, but maybe next cycle or the cycle after that, we can elect another person of color. But that's a tricky thing to do because there are no guarantees. Or do you want to say, I'm good, let's keep the 48? And that's a community question. But I can tell you, on this county council here, we only got one Black person on council. Okay? Only one. And we are guaranteed to have one person. Now, when you look at that, and this gets into the political questions in our community, what voice do we have on our councils if we only have one person? Okay? Is that person bringing up the issues that are of concern to our community, or is that person going along to get along? And those are discussions that you have to have in your communities. But this is what the data looks like. And you are going to have to delve into this when you talk about redistricting. I also want to show you that there are thematic maps that are available. If you want to say, well, you know, I get the numbers and everything, but can I get a picture where, for instance, Black people are living in my community, in my county? This is the kind of map that we can create for you to show you that. So in Spartanburg, our city is where Black folk, the majority of a lot, you know, Black populations live. Yeah, we have other places where Black people live. And we also have places where, gosh, hardly any of us live. Okay? And you can get a look at how your community and where the populations are. Once again, this is the data. Another simplistic way, and this is what I did initially for my people in Spartanburg, I took out the numbers out of the chart that I showed you earlier, and I broke it down a little bit to make it easier for them to digest. And this is what that can look like should you use to do that in your community. And then you actually have to take a look at the districts, where they are, where are the lines, where are the communities being divided, and do I want them to be that way? And this is a city map of Spartanburg, and this is a county map of Spartanburg County. And I've been talking about a lot about the other city and counties, but these are the same things that happen in school boards. And we have a weird situation in Spartanburg that we're looking to tackle. And I'll give you 30 seconds on that. These 1, 2, 3, 4 are single member Black districts, okay? There's 5 over here and they elect one person. This district 5 over here is a multi-member district. This primarily encompasses the white citizens of Spartanburg and primarily white communities held over from segregation and after some integration, but mostly in Spartanburg, white people still live in white communities. Well, when they went to set up the districts in Spartanburg, after having at-large districts, the compromise was to have 4 single-member districts for Black folk, and then 1 multi-member district of 5 people from the white side of town. Well, guess what? That means the white side of town now controls the school board on all things and in all votes. But Spartanburg now has a minority majority school district. And there are people who are now beginning to have issues with that. So they started looking in the data. Whoops. They started looking in the data. And this is how those districts now break up. And so now there's a discussion about breaking up this 1 member district here that is 70% white, to break it up into smaller single member districts. And that's because people started looking at the data. So you're going to have to delve into the data. So what am I asking you to do after an hour and a half, an hour or so of talking about this? I'm asking you to request redistricting timelines from your local city, county, and school boards. And for instance, in Spartanburg, we still have not gotten a realistic timeline with dates from either of these bodies, okay? Make sure that the process is public and that there's an opportunity, a real opportunity for public input. Obtain the data points for consistency of engagement. Make sure you're working from the same data that your local officials will be working from. Publicly announce that you have a local redistricting advisory committee, and you will find that there'll be other people in your community that will come out and say, can I join? I want to have my voice heard. Reach out to other community organizations for engagement. And keep in mind that you don't have a vote, okay? All you have is public input, public voice, and the pulpit
Right.
of the microphone. And keep in mind that what you're also doing in this effort is that you're building coalitions for a higher voter turnout for 22 and 24. Now, I'm going to stop here, and there's one other thing that I want to show you, and that is what tools are available to do this redistricting stuff. Can you see my new screen?
Yes.
This is a public application called Dave's Redistricting 2020. What you can do in working with Bridget and Lindy and people like myself, once you get that data set from your county GIS department, what you do is you import it into this program. And then you can see your districts. You may have to go through and check to make sure the districts line up where they should. But then with that data, you can now take a look at your county in an interactive map. And let me show you what else it shows. You can dig in to the detail. And if you look at on the left here, you can see what District 1 looks like from white, Black, Asian. You can look at Democratic voters and what they voted like. You can see the voting age population in those communities. And what you can also do is you can drill down and take a look at where are the lines. You can see streets here and that sort of thing. And you can see the populations as they are. Now I have this on precinct. If I take this to block, you can then begin to see the block level data, okay? The voters as I move my cursor over it. I'm gonna do the same thing for the city map. That's a county map. I'm gonna pull up the city map. I give it a moment to populate. and I'm going to drill into it. Okay, and this is Spartanburg City. And now in your city councils, you can see where the maps are. And then as you zoom in, you can see the streets. You can see how the communities are divided. And as you look at this with other members of your group and with Bridget and with Lindy, you can say, you know what? I think it is unfair that this map is now dividing that community. I think it should go over further along South Forest Street as you make the adjustments, and that will keep that community whole. You can now see where that is possible. And when you do that, you can then see how it changes the voting in your district. This is a free application. It doesn't cost anything. If you do this in a community-wide meeting, it is hard to show on a single screen, and you will have to have some projection capability to so everybody can see it. But it is a free tool that Bridget and Lindy and I have been trained on using. So with that, I'm going to stop and stop my share and ask, are there any questions?
Well, Miko just left, so thanks so much, Miko, for coming. Are there any other questions? And feel free to pop them in the chat if there are. In the meantime, I want to thank our team from Crowd Academy for putting on this presentation and sharing this idea. I want to make sure that you all put your contact information so that any of our folks here can reach out to you. We're also going to put this on YouTube a little later on. So please feel free to share it. We would like to see these committees being organized in every county, in all 46 of South Carolina counties. So I do encourage you, once we get it up on YouTube, I'll have it on my social media, and I'm sure the other folks will as well. I'll email that to you who have participated in this, and please share this with others. I do want to acknowledge once again the South Carolina Coalition for Black Communities, that Charles and I are on their steering committee, and a number of groups are represented in that organization from across the state, including Charles Group, mine, T Novs of Global Commons, the Carolina for All, based here out of Columbia, Racial Justice Network, are all members of that coalition. And I will put my email in there because I know that some of the coalition folks are probably getting ready for the holidays, and it will be difficult to reach them. So once I send you the email with the YouTube in it, if there's any question that you have, or you want some help in putting together your committee, let me know, and I'll reach out to all these folks who can help you as well.
Catherine, I have one parting comment, if I may.
Okay.
I want to go back to the, this seems like a lot of work. This is not easy work, but it's probably the most important work you're going to do that has an impact on public office holders for the next 10 years. Keep in mind that once these drawings are drawn, they will not change unless there's some driving need on a local level. They won't change for 10 years. And it's going to determine who represents and who's in the pool of voters to vote for those people. We are delighted to help you. Please reach out to either me, Bridget, or Lindy. This is what we do because we know that communities need help in this. And I can tell you, when I first got involved in this, my eyes glazed over, okay? But I realized how important the work is, and that, and if not me, who? And I think that we have to kind of look at it that way. If not you, then who would do this work? And keep in mind that coalitions, as we do this work, it is a coalition of effort that is going to drive us to have more impact in our community.
Great. And I do want to add one thing also, and to invite Bridget if she and Lindy, if you want to say anything else. The point I want to make is that the redistricting on the state level with our state house representatives and our senators that is in the process of being completed. We know that once that's done, there will be less power for brown people, if you will, in that body. A number of our legislators are going to be, no longer be there. I think at least 7 or 8. So what that means is that we must have input at the local level. That would be more important than ever, having input in our school boards, in our city, county, municipalities. That's going to be even more important. You know, that and our federal power is going to be where we are able to have an impact, because now they're kind of cutting short the amount of impact that we can have at the state level. And that's all by design. So we have to really dig in here and make sure that we have our local impacts in and our local engagement in at the local level and at the federal level in 2022. Bridget, did you have some remarks?
Catherine,
Bridget's good. Lindy, yes.
Yeah, and good evening, everyone. I'll keep it short, but I just want to echo Catherine's comments. At the local level, that's really where right now we can make a difference. And while you're considering, you know, what you can do to pull fellow community members together to create these committees and see what type of impact you can make, I would challenge everyone on this call to move quickly and do one thing this week for me. And that would be to go to your county government website or your city government website, or both, your school board website, and look up the email addresses for those elected officials and email them and just say, you know, I'm so-and-so, I'm a county resident, and I am interested in learning where you all are at with your redistricting activities and when your next meeting is happening. Because what we have found is as soon as they hear that someone is watching them and asking questions, things start tightening up pretty quick. And so that's a quick little impact you can make now. And we need to do it now because some of our counties, they are moving quick. For example, Dorchester County along the coastline near in my neck of the woods, they're having their third and final reading of their new redistricting plans tomorrow night. And then they're done. They are moving on. And so some of these folks have already had some of their public hearings, or they've already had their meetings, and they're going to be finalizing this stuff in January. And then some will have a little bit more time with. So I would just say, since you may not be sure where your specific county or city or school board is at with their process, go to their website this week, look up their email addresses, they're all listed, and just shoot them a quick email and say, I'm a concerned resident of, you know, Dorchester County or Horry County or wherever you live. And I would like to know specifically where you're at in your redistricting activities and when your next meeting is open to the public, because I would like to attend. That it's small, it would take 5-10 minutes, but it will make an impact, I promise you. And then you can kind of move on from there and say, okay, how do I create this greater committee? Because that's going to take a little bit more time to organize. So I just wanted to add that, and I'm so happy to be with everybody tonight, and be well, and let us know how we can support you in your communities in this effort.
That's a fabulous ending. I have one final question in the box before we close. Is there any thought to a court challenge against the lines drawn by the General Assembly? So
I
I
can,
think we have answered to that. Yes.
yeah, from my experience, I'm sorry, from my engagement so far, on a call last week, with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I think the ACLU was part of that call. They are beginning to line up and prepare for legal challenges. And one of the things that they said during that session, I shouldn't say said, but requested during that session, if you know of anyone who is willing to sign on as an individual to say that you've been harmed by the maps that the General Assembly has been done, they would like to talk to you and make you part of the lawsuit that they ultimately will file. So, and if you do want to do that, reach out to your local NAACP or reach out to the state conference, Brenda Murphy, and let her know that you know someone or you are that person that want to sign on as an individual in the lawsuits. But those are the two that I now know that are preparing for litigation. And by the way, they are preparing for litigation more than likely under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, since Section 5 was gutted in 2013.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank all of our attendees for participating and hanging in there with us and asking lots of sharp questions and saying, hey, whoa, it's going too fast when it was, and we could make sure we responded to those questions. I want to thank our members here of Crowd Academy. And I think one of the participants said he is also in Crowd Academy as well. So that's terrific. Welcome to you. I want to thank Lindy Stubbs and Charles Mann and Bridget Deline for making such a wonderful presentation, very detail oriented to encourage the public to be engaged. We want you to follow up with Lindy's recommended next step, so please do that. I will be sending you the recording of this program probably sometime tonight or tomorrow, as soon as it finishes doing its whole thing. And we'll also have it on YouTube and on our other social media. So I also personally want to thank the South Carolina Coalition for Black Communities for SOLVE, which has funded collectively, our group collectively, and a number of individual groups, including our group, to be able to do this and to bring you this event today. So we have lots of work to do, and we're ready to go with it. So we really appreciate all of you being here with us tonight. Thank you.